that are product adjacent to what ServiceNow does. So very excited for our conversation today. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. Without further ado, we're gonna maybe quickly start with a quick round of intros. If each of you could spend a couple of minutes, tell us about yourself, your work, your journey in climate, and now we've been here for almost, couple of weeks, I would say. What are your impressions about COP? So.
Thanks so much, and thanks to Hedera for the chance to be here and to engage in this conversation. It's at the end of the day, so I'm hoping we can be kind of punchy and conversational. So my name's Catherine Atkin. I'm an attorney from California, and I am thinking about COP, and you know what? That's one of those things where you're like, if you're here at COP, you know you don't really know what to say about COP. I mean, it really is. There's so many kind of internal contradictions, and you can look at it at different levels, right? I mean, it's always powerful to be in partnership with people, and we always come out smarter, and we've created, hopefully, you know, certainly new friends, and hopefully we're gonna do some things out of it. And then us, like anybody back at home, is reading the headlines and trying to figure out, like, are we making progress? Are we gonna feel proud that we were here in 10 years or say, like, we were suckers? So I don't know. But I am here on this panel. I'm excited to talk about policy and regulation. I had the opportunity in California to be the main architect and legal advisor for the new corporate GHG emissions disclosure law that was passed in California in October, signed into law. So we're very excited to have a first in the nation corporate GHG reporting disclosure requirement. And I'm gonna get a chance to talk to you about, we did 3 really cool things. I didn't do all of them, but we collectively did. And so I'll get a chance to talk about that.
Hi, my name is Miles Austin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Hyphen Global AG, which is a climate tech company based in Basel, Switzerland. And what we're really focused on doing is providing precision emissions measurement, reporting, and verification through atmospheric monitoring. So our approach is a little bit different, where typically complemented by satellite and remote sensing, but doesn't rely on that. So we're really focused on providing hardware and expanding more infrastructure out into specific sites to be able to monitor greenhouse gas concentrations and the fluctuations over space and time. So really trying to improve the measurement and providing more data out into the ecosystem of carbon cycles and the actual reductions of removals in quantities of metric tons.
Thank you, and hello everyone. I'm Brittany Pettit. As Suchi said, I work at ServiceNow. My role is on the product side, so I'm the outbound product manager for our ESG management application. It's part of the risk portfolio of products. My background is predominantly in HR and HRIS, but my degree is in sustainability. So I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to represent ServiceNow and our approach to the ESG management and reporting space, which dovetails heavily with the policy and compliance side of things, but also broaches into impact, sustainability, program management, and all the ways that we help ServiceNow clients and customers to advance their sustainability initiatives at whatever stage of maturity they are.
Awesome. We have a great mix of folks from regulation to industry to innovation, so I think it'll be a great conversation. Catherine, I'll start with you. Over the years, how have you seen the regulatory landscape change? I mean, you've been monitoring and you've been closely involved in with the latest policy and that got signed into law. What stands out for you? What was that process like the last few years that you were involved in it? And who do you think are the key stakeholders when it comes to defining or writing a policy?
Thanks for that, and I wish I could say I had this sort of long historical lens on this. I actually just moved into climate from the ed tech space about 6 years ago. So, but some of what's good about that is that, you need some sort of like fresh and gullible types that are like, why is this voluntary? This makes no sense. How are we going to build a multi-trillion-dollar climate economy? How are we going to unleash climate action? How are we going to redistribute wealth to decarbonize our globe and create sustainable environments if people can pick and choose like what their GHG adventure is? So for me, that was really kind of that newcomer, look at it, but also having had the experience to say, there's a way to do this. And in California, we have such a, wonderful legacy of, low carbon fuel standards and cap and trade and just all kinds of environmental, sort of first in the nation or first in California becomes first in the nation and impacts the globe because we're such a huge economy. We're the 5th largest economy in the world. So it doesn't really take a brain surgeon, just a lawyer wanting to try to make a change to say, like, we should make this mandatory in California. So if you do business in California and you're a $1 billion corporation, you have to disclose your entire carbon footprint according to the GHG protocol. So that's a very simple, actually, reform. And I would just say that, in terms of the process, I want to say that, a lot of times, and especially in the innovation space, I live in Silicon Valley, people do innovations and technology because they don't really like regulation. Like they feel like it keeps them, from getting where they want to go. And I think the reality is we're seeing that as we mature as a climate tech space, that we're not going to get where we want to go without enabling environment. We're displacing powerful legacy interests. And so it requires us to care about this. So I also am a big believer in GHG data, climate data. That was what I was kind of like decided I would be kind of, be an expert on, quote unquote. And so I think that when we make, climate data the driver, then great things can happen. I don't know if you want me to talk about the couple other reforms that happen in California. So to me, it's really about transparency, radical transparency, and a drive for data-driven markets. And so I think, obviously, that's music to most of your ears. And I do think that there's a systems approach to making that happen. You can't just have the solution providers. And for me, I think what we're seeing right now is that disclosure is where we're starting. In the United States, we're not going to regulate this. And I think that I think in other places in the EU, we're going to see more of that, and that is powerful. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't also be trying to drive things through regulation. But for us, disclosure was the driver. We did 3 things in California: the GHG emissions for corporates, climate risk reporting, a la TCFD, a broader approach for $500 million corporations, if you have revenue of more than $500 million. And you do business in California. This is public and private. So we also were really clear, it can't just be about, the publicly traded companies. The third one, and I actually brought it. So while everybody was, causing getting upset, we had like $30 million in business interest lobby money trying to keep us from getting the corporate GHG reporting bill passed. AB 1305 was passed and signed into law, which is an actually seriously landmark piece of legislation that is going to drive carbon markets. So it is the most expansive and rigorous sort of disclosure for carbon markets that you're going to see. It takes what's in CSRD and like blows it out. And so, not only will all sellers of carbon credits, but all purchasers will have to disclose protocols, plans. What happens if you don't do what you said you were going to do? And yes.
There. So is it the companies that are choosing to voluntarily commit to net zero, or is it applicable to?
It's applicable to, there's like 3 categories of coverage. If you sell a carbon credit and somebody can buy that in California, you're subject to this law. So the sellers have like the most, like there's a long list of like 9 things you have to do. And it's really no joke. So if you are a purchaser of one of those credits, then you also in California, you will also be subject to the rule, regardless of a net zero pledge. But the most expansive piece of it is that even if you don't actually engage in the carbon markets, if you have a net zero target or a carbon neutral target, or you say you have achieved any reductions in GHG emissions as a company, you will be required to explain exactly how you're doing that and be accountable for that over time. So as what you're seeing is that we're creating disclosure that then leads to litigation, right? So that's the setup here. You're going to say disclose, 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 and then those companies are going to have to think, and credit sellers are going to have to think very carefully about whether what they're saying is what they're doing, because then we're going to use you're now seeing a much more robust environment for consumer, deceptive practices, fraud. The federal government in the United States is creating a green guide. There's going to be a lot more scrutiny of that greenwashing, so they're kind of synergistic.
All right. Okay. Yes. Brittany, maybe I'll go to you next. What are you seeing from you work across a portfolio of customers that from an ESG perspective? How is it impacting industry? How are they taking it? How are they reacting to it? What's top of mind for them? So if you could just share.
Yeah, sure. And what I think is really interesting is that in the ESG space, ESG is so dynamic, right? Sustainability is a new industry, it's a new domain, and as a result, what you're seeing is a lot of inconsistency in terms of how the companies that we speak to are reacting both to the regulatory push and to the broader ESG or CSR initiative that's been going on for the last 10 or 15 years. So because ESG as an acronym has really only come to the forefront in the last 3 to 5 years or so, but sustainability as a practice has been around and has been implemented for decades at this point. There's a really wide range of maturity levels. And so you find companies who just now are starting to sort of awaken to the fact that there are these new regulations and requirements that from a disclosure standpoint are really challenging the way that they manage their data, that they manage their sustainability processes, and really kind of are putting pressure on them in a way that they haven't really experienced before. They've been maybe adjacent to sustainability in the past. But from a regulatory standpoint, now those drivers, CSRD and the California regulations, are really changing for them what it means to do sustainability. They're exploring it from a financial standpoint. They explore it from a compliance standpoint in a way that sustainability in the past for them may have been a marketing initiative or effort. Or maybe they saw an innovation opportunity, but it wasn't necessarily part of a disclosure. As opposed to on the more mature end of the scale, the folks that have been doing this for 10, 15, 20 years, they're really looking at impact. They've got their GHG protocol down, right? They've been doing GRI reporting for years and years. For them, the conversation is about what are some of the new innovations that are coming onto the market that we can use to be even more effective in our sustainability programs. So for them, the regulations aren't a huge deal because they've been there. They got it, right? Even Scope 3 to a certain extent. They've got their arms around it. They know what they don't know at least, as opposed to on the less mature end of the scale, folks that are just kind of coming to the ESG table have a lot to learn. So the reactions, the responses are quite varied, but at least you're able to identify very quickly based on how a company is responding, what their level of maturity is, and therefore from a technology perspective, how can we be prescriptive and help them meet the moment where they are today and get to where they want to go.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, so Miles, where do you see Hyphen fit into the ecosystem, and how are you working from a regulation perspective or policy perspective? Could you speak a little bit about it?
Absolutely. So while we're highly focused on providing MRV services for really dynamic and diverse ecosystems that sometimes can be difficult to accurately measure through purely emissions factors, part of what we're doing is actually going and improving the monitoring networks in the world. So in different areas, we're setting up more infrastructure and specifically monitoring towers to be able to measure in real time continuously the greenhouse gas concentrations and the fluxes. And what the fluxes are is it's the fluctuations of these particles in the atmosphere as they're moving into the atmosphere as a source or out of the atmosphere as a reduction or removal, whether that's in the forms of sequestration in forestry or in other implementations of insetting instead of offsetting through supply chains, whether that's in oil and gas or waste management or in regenerative agriculture. Now, while we are focused on providing these MRV services to clients, whether that's corporates for insetting or large-scale forestry initiatives in agriculture for offsetting, it's very complementary to a lot of the work for nation states on their NDC reporting. So while we are improving this network of towers to monitor emissions, what that does is it actually gives a better understanding of the reality of what is happening in the atmosphere. And what we found through numerous different studies that have been conducted within the auspice of the World Meteorological Organization is that oftentimes the reportings of corporate emissions do not always align with the reality of what's happening in the atmosphere. There's a really good example I'd like to highlight that was a study done in Switzerland. And when Switzerland has a cutting edge monitoring network for greenhouse gas emissions throughout all of Switzerland. They wanted to compare how the actual reality of what's in the atmosphere compares to the disclosures through emissions factors, specifically with methane. And what they found was that the overall difference between the emissions factors and the atmospheric-based approach was not a tremendous difference, but in some areas it was. And so it was the attribution that really came into importance, where they discovered that they were actually overestimating methane from agriculture by 30%. And in northern Switzerland, most of the emissions from urban areas were significantly smaller than they were estimating as well. And so what it did was it provided the clarity to be able to understand exactly when and where emissions are coming from and how accurate that is and how it correlates to emissions factors, which allows for the ability to refine these emissions factors, to improve them, to become more and more accurate. And so while we're deploying this infrastructure, I think it complements very well a lot of the corporate activities to be able to match those to reality and be able to produce more data and more accurate data in real time to be able to pass to anyone, whether that's regulators, corporates, climate accounting firms, or other MRV providers that would benefit from using this data that's created to sharpen and improve their own AI and machine learning models.
Great, awesome. Well, before we move on from our topic of regulation, I have one last question. How much regulation is too much before it becomes a friction it's a heavy lift for anyone, right, to comply? Like, how can we make it so that maybe it's not? Or are there any thoughts?
Yeah,
there?
I mean, it's not a hammer and everything's a nail, but
Yeah.
I do think that it really, in this space, we really haven't, we're not near it yet. And I think this group would agree that we're not creating the right driver for decarbonization. We do not have sufficient pressure on polluters to decarbonize. And so I think that, the fact that it's California and, the EU, and obviously the ISSB standard is in the fact that countries are going to adopt, that's going to be great. But I mean, I think we all just have to do our part right now to create a surround sound of like, you've got, there's pressure on you to do this. And then when you do it, you have to be accountable for it. And it has to be, we need to have the highest quality data. And we do have to redistribute wealth that's created from this. So I would say in this space, I'm not that worried. I do think that that doesn't mean the transition for these companies is easy. And obviously now we're gonna talk about technology, and that's why I'm a big believer that there are a lot of solutions and the markets will be created for these solutions. Believe me, when the largest industries have to decarbonize, they're going to figure out how to find out the ways to do that. So I would just say we're not there yet when it comes to climate.
Yes, I agree. Please.
I think what's a really interesting inflection point in this conversation that I'm not going to opine on whether it's right or wrong is the topic of scope 3 as it relates to regulation specifically, because I think it really highlights where the friction is when folks are asking or answering that question. Because I think what happens is that as somebody who is maybe corporate or in industry says, that's not appropriate for me, that's not something that I'm comfortable with, that is too far, right? That's beyond the pale for us. It really does beg the question as to, well, why is that the case? And what are sort of the obstacles that are causing you to feel that way about this particular element of a regulation? And I think that's where technology starts to come in and answer and say, well, if the reason that you disagree with or don't believe that this is appropriate to be reporting on is simply because you don't have the ability right now to do so, then what kind of opportunities does that create for innovation to sort of address those problems, right? We really need to ask, is it actually the right regulation? And it's just the ability to execute and report accurately and effectively that's the challenge, or is it the regulation itself that is not appropriate? And I think from a technologist standpoint, our job is to make it as easy as possible to meet whatever the requirements are. And I know we'll talk about technology in a minute, but that is one of the things that we talk about with customers is how do we make sure that wherever the regulation is going to be, that we're going to give you the tools to be there and to meet it. So instead of hemming and hawing about pushing back against a regulation or a component of a regulation, we think a little bit more about kind of clearing some of that friction and clearing those obstacles away so that we can land at the appropriate place for the regulations in their own right.
Yeah, I just wanted to say on this point about scope 3, it's like scope 3 is on average 90% of the carbon footprint of a company. So if you're not requiring scope 3, you can't manage what you don't measure. We cannot get where we need to go. So, and I love that, like, you know, I can say that because that's where I'm sitting, and I know what it's like when I have so many attorneys across, and CFOs, people calling and just saying this is a disaster, we don't know how to do it, and I just think we're all in a situation where we have to get uncomfortable to get this done. I mean, right? It's not going to be easy, and so I think when it comes to scope 3, I also want to say, is scope 3 reporting the data under the GHG protocol perfect? No. Is secondary data where we want to be, a couple years down the line? No. But I think the driver of getting those companies to actually have to look at how big this thing is going to lead to also better data, because they're going to have to go and reduce it. And to really reduce it, you've got to have better data, and then you've also got to find solution providers. So just wanted to share that.
I think just which complements that so much is that last week the White House had just put out a new national initiative specifically focusing, which references a lot to scope 3 emissions, on how using typically through the GHG protocol different things. In some cases it works very well, but in other cases how can we improve these systems? And what I found was particularly interesting was throughout the entire document it's referencing that we specifically need to improve the monitoring network in the United States, to be able to compare the reality of what's happening to emissions factors, to be able to refine those and improve those with a large emphasis on scope 3, to be able to understand, okay, if no one's claiming these through scope 1 and 2, where are these coming from and what's the attribution look like? And is that coming in your own value chain or outside of that? And how can we start to gain more clarity and accuracy on this in closer to near real time?
Wonderful. Well, before we move on to the next pillar, which is technology and solutions, I just wanted to do a time check. Christian, do we know how much more time do we have? Because oh, cool, awesome. I do want to open it up at some point to questions, so keep your questions ready. Maybe the last 10 minutes or so. All right, from what role do you think technology plays in, I would say, one of my observations in attending COP is a lot of people doing a lot of incredible things, right? But it's very siloed. And then how do you make data actionable? Like, data has been a theme. So what role do you think technology plays in connecting everyone? And how do you make data actionable so you can do something with it, right? So maybe, Brittany, you want to talk about what we're doing?
Yeah, sure. And I really like the idea of approaching this space as somebody who is a little bit more gullible, because coming to ESG from HR and HRAS, these are not new challenges, right? HR, when it moved to the cloud, let's say, or when even before that, HR moved away from being sort of personnel management to being more of a strategic driver of an effective organization. It sort of became the norm that you needed to manage a good set of data and you needed to get actionable data into the hands of decision makers to work with well and be effective in their HR and employee management. And so coming to the ESG space, starting to ask these questions all over again of like, what does it mean to centralize your ESG data? How do we make sure that we've got everything that we need in one place so that sustainability personas and where the operations actually take place, that you're pulling the levers to drive some kind of impact, that you're all on the same page with that. So it's interesting that you can see the same question that technology has answered in the past, and even before that, finance and logistics. I mean, this is always the hammer. This is always the nail that the hammer of technology is looking for. It's really great that we can see that play out again here. And so for me, thinking of it from a technology standpoint and thinking about it especially from an enterprise platform standpoint, right? ServiceNow is a technology platform that touches many areas within an organization. We have applications and we have users in pretty much every domain within an organization you can think of. So for us, answering that question of how do we bring together all of the data necessary to actually make it actionable, to make a decision that is going to impact the company and their ability to achieve their sustainability objectives, really comes down to how good is your platform at getting information from where it is, from that siloed data owner, to a centralized repository where you can also take action on it. And so for me, that is the role of technology, is making sure that you've got the sort of the irrigation in place to grow those crops and to centralize all of that data into a particular place, and that it is actionable within the same system where you're going to operationally pull some lever or make some change within the organization that will have downstream impacts on your ESG reporting. We want to make sure that you have the tools in place to do that today. We talk about like, what is the responsibility of technology? I think the responsibility of technology from my standpoint is to reduce those obstacles, to remove those obstacles, and to create those bridges that allow you to cross many different domains that historically haven't necessarily been in the same data set or on the same dashboard. How can we take that ownership and take the responsibility to make it easier for the folks who are on the ground, in the field, in a truck, in an office, making a decision about how their business is going to get run? How do we make it easier for them to do their job from a sustainability perspective? To me, that's what technology is uniquely positioned to do.
Maybe just to add to that, something that I've heard numerously throughout all of COP and highlighted many times today is a very large emphasis on data. But I think when it comes to data, there's such advancements taking place around the technology right now, and data can sometimes be referred to quite broadly and vaguely. But within data, I think there's a few things that are very important to highlight, which are enabled by new technologies, specifically with distributed ledger technologies. But the way I view data is, most importantly, we need to be able to have not just the transparency and the traceability, but the auditability of this data, to understand exactly where it came from, if this was changed, when, why, and how. And that leads very nicely into methodologies, which I heard a little bit on the first panel today. But data is so important. But I have a saying that says, you can have the world's best data and the most accurate data, but if you take that data and you apply the wrong methodology to the data, now you've ruined the data, essentially. And so what I think is incredibly unique through some of the work and some of the solutions put forward by the HBAR Foundation and the Hedera Guardian system, primarily following the GBBC's CET framework and the digital MRV framework, is it allows for the ability to be able to have a completely comprehensive approach on the data, the methodologies that are used, which allows for raw data to be coming in and being logged so that you can see exactly what the raw information is, and then in comparison see the modeled information and be able to make your own assessment and your own judgment on that. And for me, I think that's incredibly motivating beyond just the sort of low-hanging fruits of being able to make it more transparent and auditable, but it should, in return, provide more confidence to buyers or regulators, because they can make their own assessment on exactly how people are modeling their own information, coming up with the disclosures that they are, whether that's for scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, or if that's for offsetting and insetting. It really allows the robust transparency to be able to not just see the data, but compare how they're using the data to model, ultimately resulting in some sort of a claim.
Awesome. Well, you mentioned HBAR Foundation and Hedera. I know you're the newest grantee of the HBAR Foundation. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how you're working with the ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it feeds off quite well what I was just saying, where we're very focused on providing IoT and hardware out into the field, whether that's internally to a supply chain or externally and in forestry and agriculture. But what's really important is that at a Hyphen we never want to be a branded entity that says, hey, trust us because we're well connected and we're established, right? What we really want to be able to do is say, let the science speak for itself and let the data match that science and also speak for itself. And that goes in hand a lot with what we're working on with the Hedera's Guardian system, is as we set up these monitoring networks in various places in the world, we want to be able to show the raw information as that's generated from each sensor and as close to real time as we can get, log that on Hedera, show that in the Guardian ecosystem, and as we apply our MRV services following the GBBC and Interwork Alliance's digital MRV framework, to be able to really show, okay, here's the raw information coming in from the sensors. This is exactly how we're modeling it. This is exactly how our methodology works. We are not going to tell you it's the best because we think it's the best. Make your own assessment. Pick it apart. Question it for yourselves. We're confident that the science and the data and the methodologies will speak for themselves. And I think that it's beautiful to work with an organization like HBAR, where they've designed the toolkit to be able to really fit in with our systems to be able to enable that and hopefully provide more solutions on the market. So we're extremely excited to be part of the ecosystem.
Wonderful. Anything?
Yeah,
Yes,
no, that,
please.
I just would like, I feel like exactly what you said. Like, we need radical transparency, and I think that there's different ways to ensure that companies or entities have control over their data and that they choose what data to disclose. And obviously, I'm of the opinion that we need more data to be disclosed. I mean, it's, that is, to me, is we've got too much siloed data. We have too much proprietary data. I mean, really, there's just too many people that are monetizing the data in ways that's not going to allow us to have the kind of visibility we need to make good decisions individually and collectively. And I do appreciate the HBAR Foundation for that approach to open source, and the Guardian, to me, is a real contribution in that way. I would say that data interoperability is critical as well. And I mean, when you think about the burdens on companies, I mean, this is one that I actually do have some sympathy for, which is, not every standard is going to be exactly the same, or every regulation. So the idea that we're going to have one globally, sort of driven set of data requirements is not what's going to happen. So that where data taxonomies really come into play is so that we can have corporations and entities, whether it's countries or they can have their data and then they can tag it and they can send it where it needs to go. So I do think that's really where technologies need to build in, whether they use DLT or not, they need to build in that sort of data taxonomy so that we can begin to create more ease for disclosure over time.
Wonderful. And while I have you, Catherine, are there ways that industry or innovators can work closely with regulators? Is any of the decision making that happens at the policy level informed by industry, or what is that process like? Yeah.
Well, welcome to the party. I mean, I think that this is a great. One of the things I've been gratified to see is, and I've said this consistently in conversations about this, is that a lot of the VC community, the climate tech community, just really didn't have time for partnership on this kind of work. And I think we're really seeing a shift now where people and entities are recognizing that it's critical to be at the table. I luckily, I had a foot in some different worlds and carry that value, but I have been heartened to see more engagement, and I would encourage that. We're going to be implementing the California law. There's going to be a process there. We're going to be figuring out, should there be interim assurance standards? All of this is going to drive this community's success if we do that well. So I would say there hasn't been as much as there should be, but I do see a shift now. And I think companies, frankly, primarily were opposing all this. So they were active. They were just active in the wrong way. And I will say, though, that we had some great leading climate-forward companies come on board, and that's why we were able to pass this law. We could not have done it without Microsoft and Apple and Google and Salesforce and some other leading companies. But them deciding that being a climate-forward company cannot just be being in charge of your own footprint, but you have to be a steward for corporate America or corporate whatever, I think is super powerful. And I'm beginning to see the break from the business lobby on this, so I see some really positive signs.
Wonderful. Please, yeah, I'd like to flip the question. How would you like to partner?
Yeah, well, I guess, it's, from my perspective, I think it's incredibly important to have more communications with regulators. And I think if we sort of envision that there's a round table we're assembling for people to all work on the best solutions, whether that's from innovation or regulatory frameworks, I think something that's really important to include at that table is the scientific community in the world of academia, right? And I think that there's a really unique opportunity for innovation to sit as the bridge between the scientific communities and the world of academia and the regulators, to hear what are the scientists saying, what are the meteorologists understanding, and what are they learning in the changes in the atmosphere today as a result of natural ecosystems or from activities through industry. And letting them voice these concerns, letting them understand, to voice their understandings and their learnings to the regulators to shape the best frameworks in place, which I think opens up the door for extreme innovation to be able to build the solutions and build the bridges to be able to really take the findings of the scientific communities, bridge those data tunnels into the regulators while building entire companies and frameworks around that in the middle. So I think the triangle between those three things is really, really important.
Wonderful. Brittany, you want to?
Yeah, everyone's favorite phrase, violent agreement, right? Like, I couldn't agree more. I think technology really is that connective tissue that allows you to incorporate that scientific and that academic background at the enterprise level, right? So within the corporate perspective, while you're in industry, being able to take advantage of that and have it be fully aligned with the regulatory expectation as well, because you have formed that triangle. And technology eliminates those barriers that says, that's great to know that that information is out there, but it's not decision useful to somebody who's working in the field. It's not something that is relevant to my daily operations as a business owner or as somebody who has a role within an organization where you can make decisions to run your business differently. And I think from technology's standpoint, that is our responsibility, is to be able to deliver that cross-functional communication across all of the different stakeholders, right, within the organization, eliminating any kind of friction that says, no, I can't do that, right? Because with technology, we always like to think that you can do anything with technology, and I think this is one of the areas that we've seen that has been the case in other areas before. And it really is absolutely going to be the case now within sustainability and ESG as well. We just need to get everybody together at the table and decide what those things will be, and make sure that whatever it is that whether it's a regulatory or a scientific or academic driver, that you have the tools to have those conversations and get that information where it needs to go. And our job is to stay a step ahead of that.
Awesome. Yeah, I think technology can pretty much solve anything. It's the adoption sometimes that.
Anything.
Right.
It's not us.
All right, cool. I would love to open it up for questions if we have any. Do we have a mic in the audience for the audience?
Hello. Hey. Firstly, thank you for SB 253. I think it's a huge, huge deal. I think the one concern that I have, right, is like this idea of like quality in, quality out, and then garbage in, garbage out, right? And if I read the sustainability reports of some of these companies today, I would forget that there's a climate crisis. That like they're carbon neutral, they're this, they're that, right? And you know, sometimes it reeks of greenwashing, candidly. So what is going to be the role of regulators and addressing that concern?
Yeah, well, I would just say I actually think we've got a lot of good regulation coming, sort of into play right now. And I think transparency is going to drive a lot of that. And as I said, we're seeing these disclosure laws are being set up to drive litigation. I do think when you talk about garbage in, garbage out, I absolutely agree with you. And I think that, the next 2 or 3 years I think we're going to see a lot of these corporations basically withdraw their net zero claims, their carbon neutral product claims. Everybody is going to quiet down and figure out what they can say. And so I do think we do need to put pressure on them to continue to increase their ambition, because I think that would be one of those, unfortunate, like if we slow this down because they're afraid to say anything. But I think that's the cost of, getting it right. So yeah, no, I share your same concern, but I do think that we're creating a better ecosystem right now. But that being said, I feel like we know emissions are not reducing quickly, and we do need a lot of political pressure. We're seeing it, we're living it right now.
Yeah, and I think that it's something to your point that you mentioned earlier is around assurance, right? Because I think there is a big opportunity to say, yeah, greenwashing is an issue, and if only there were somebody that could come along and vet the quality of your data in order to validate your quality out through your disclosure reporting. And I think that's why, there is a lag, of course, from a regulatory perspective, because first you have to give folks the opportunity to get good quality in, give them that opportunity. But I think that is also, something that is quietly becoming part of the conversation, right? Once everyone gets over the fact that they have to do GHG reporting, including Scope 3, then they start to focus their attention on, oh, and I need to have limited assurance at the very least on this, if not more, in the coming years. I think that's the next level of conversation that you're going to start to see, especially as CSRD starts to kick that in. And I think that is exactly the point of that conversation. So from a technology perspective, again, and this is something that Miles talked about as well, it comes down to having good quality auditable data as well. It's not just high quality in that it's accurate, it's high quality in that you can put a rubber stamp of approval on it, right? You're treating it like financial data. You're going to put it in a 10K, right? It's the whole idea is that you have that same level of quality as well. And whether or not assurance is mandated or regulated, there is still already a big push from a voluntary perspective to eliminate that impression of greenwashing by getting that third-party assurance. So again, I do think that there will be a little bit of a regulatory push that is delayed slightly behind, ESG and non-financial material data. But I think assurance is either a regulatory or from a voluntary perspective, attempting to answer that question.
Okay, so I have a question on regards of more being a provocative one, as you guys mentioned in the beginning. This is my last day at COP, and it was the first COP I came also. And we work as a technology developer for this scene, and we are also seeing that what it is lacking is the adoption. And yesterday we were at a panel, and a person from an indigenous community from Brazil, he asked the panelists saying, are you guys going to wait until the nature is gone to decide things, or and then my question is, in your perspective and being in the other side of the table, is it going to happen? Like, what is the perspective in terms of like, does it need to happen something really huge for people to take action, or what is it missing? What's your feeling or thoughts about this? That's it.
Maybe I can. I'll set you up nicely to chime in here. But I think if we could use Indonesia as an example. So within Indonesia, there was a lot of uncertainty around the regulatory framework coming into place, primarily for the voluntary carbon market. But as a regulatory framework has now begun to come into place and is going to continue to evolve, what that's done is it's led to a lot more confidence, not only in buyers, but project developers and MRV providers. And by doing so, what you allow is a lot more action to take place quicker. And so what I'm saying through that is that I personally invite through the door regulation. I think bringing in regulation, as long as it's done correctly through this little analogy I used of assembling a round table, I believe regulation is a healthy thing that brings more confidence to the market, provides the clarity, and in my personal belief will result in taking more action quicker. And then also provides the opportunity for, if you don't take action, there can also be consequences.
Go ahead. Yeah, I mean, thank you for that question. And you know, I feel like we each just have to like go way beyond our comfort zone. And I question whether I absolutely know we're not all doing that. And so I think you're right. And I think when it comes to the voluntary carbon market, you know, for me, people did a very poor job of setting up the success of that, and Global South is paying the price. And that's not right. So I think everybody better get it together quickly and, you know, clean up that market, because we're not going to get, it's unfortunate, we are not going to get financed Global South in the way that it should happen by just redistributing north wealth to the south. And so, you know, that to me is the driver for the voluntary carbon markets. I also think we have to recognize that I'm a big believer in MRV. I want to, you know, monetize and, you know, make everything data. But there's also some of those climate actions that absolutely need to be supported, that if we create a bar for that is so high that we will be losing the really important work to support that. So I'm with you, and I think there's just be a lot of political pressure on the system. I mean, really, like, we're not, you know, I love technology and innovation, but we're not going to get there unless we disrupt these markets.
Yeah, I mean, very little to add, but I will just echo what I think it was Christoph in the last panel said, that it's really going to be about the inflection of policy and where that comes to meet the carbon markets, and that the carbon markets are you know, as we saw that Matthew was setting up, right, from a Tolan perspective, is that we're really trying to capture the information so that we can make sure that change is happening and is affecting the right people and the right environments and the right places of the world. It just takes that sort of domino effect of policy meets finance, meets that auditable data that tells you that, yes, the change really is happening. And I think there's momentum in each of those areas. They just, you know, they need to find each other, which hopefully, being this your last day of COP, you saw some evidence of happening. Not sure, but I do think that is exactly the right question to be asking here. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I think everything important has been said, but I just have one more comment on that. As long as it's someone else's problem to solve, I don't think it's ever going to get solved, right? So we all have to take individual responsibility and have to show up for the planet. So I think that's something that we also, hopefully we can all take back home and show up at the next COP with, I don't know, a better human for the planet. So, all right. Do we have time for more, or one more maybe? Okay. All right. Okay.
Less than 60 seconds, and they have less than 60 seconds. Dale St. Clair, my question is, where does regulation stand with respect to blockchain? Blockchain, as you know, addresses the trust issue that exists, and blockchain carbon credits are fairly almost well designed. So where is that in the conversation?
I'll try to keep it as quick as possible, and it's coming more from a personal opinion, which I think maybe a lot of people within the wider Web3 ecosystems might not agree with me. But living in a place like Switzerland where you have regulatory clarity in place, it makes everything more efficient. And so I personally stand in the position where I warmly invite it in. I think that if you had more regulation in place, if done correctly, listening to the experts and collaborating with experts in the technology space, that it would bring more confidence in and make things work smoother. So personally, I think it's a good thing to invite regulation into these markets, and it's going to result better for everybody, but it's about doing it correctly.
Well, I think that's all the time we have. Well, they'll be around for a bit, but
Thank you.
no, thank you. Thank you all. Yes. All right. Thank you.
So I just want to thank all the panelists. Suchi, thank you very much for moderating. And as we're about to wrap up, I want to just have a few closing thoughts and set up for our last lightning talk. But before I do or say anything, I just want to ask everyone who's from the team supporting the event, the Hub Culture team, and all the staff who did audio, video, gave us drinks, fed us today. Can we get a round of applause for them? Big thank you to the Hedera team. There's a lot of the Hedera team governing council members who aren't here today, but gave us the opportunity to put this event together at COP. I want to say a big thank you to Christian, Lena, who's not here, who helped put together this event. I want to say a big thank you to every single one of the speakers, our community members, Jonathan, Hanya, Serge, and all of our team who made this possible, all the folks who did demonstrations and flew from very far to come here, make this possible, so a round of applause for them as well. And the last thing, I want to say is we heard from experts all across the industry today. When we started this, we were talking about partnerships, ways we can engage when Masamba and Mbaye were talking about how to engage in the context of the Paris Agreement. We heard about scaling validation and verification opportunities in the Global South, how we can benefit communities by thinking about things like equity on our second panel. We heard about attributes and different discourse and dialogue on assets where we're thinking about frameworks to discovering a global carbon price, and now we just heard about making ESG reporting credible. As we go have drinks over the next hour or so, I'd ask that if you haven't met someone, go talk to someone you don't know, 2 people you don't know, 3 people you don't know. Meet someone who you can work together with on these goals. They're not technology goals. They're focusing on impact and outcomes that we can enable between now and the next COP. And break those problems down as much as you can, working with communities that you go back to after we leave Dubai. And if we can work on one of these goals together, we're going to end up in a better place between now and next year. And so with that, I'd like to get one more round of applause for everyone who made this possible, and invite everyone over to go see Stan's demo, focusing on emission tracking and how he's using Guardian to actually measure emissions and offset for this event. So with that, thank you very much.